You're listening to CherryPickin Entertainment.
Throw me the ball and watch what I do with it.
You are now tuned into the CherryPickin podcast with your host, Andre Cherry.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into the CherryPickin podcast. We are now approaching week 6 of the college football season, which is wild to think that we're already 6 weeks in. But it's been an exciting season thus far. There's been some crazy games, some wild storylines. And on this week's podcast, we'll get into the games from week 5 that had my interest. I'll also give you my top 5 locks for week 6 action. And then we'll wrap this podcast up with a bow, and we'll send you on your merry way. Let's just dive right in. If we look at some of the top games out of week 5, we had LSU versus Ole Miss, a big-time matchup out of the SEC West. This game was a shootout with an insane amount of offense. LSU and Ole Miss posted 1,343 total yards. I'll repeat that one more time. 1,343 total yards between these two offenses. Ole Miss ultimately got the victory that they so desperately needed to stay in contention within the SEC West by a ridiculous score of 55-49, which, if you ask me, is more like a YMCA YBL type score. Do you ever play YMCA YBL basketball, youth basketball league at the YMCA? That reminds me of a score reminiscent of my experience playing YBL ball when I was on the gray team and we whooped up on the green team pretty good in the Naperville area YBL league. But anyways, Ole Miss got the victory. If we take a look specifically at Ole Miss, the Rebels led all teams with 706 total yards and had over 315 yards rushing. If we look 2 weeks ago to their loss against Alabama, the Rebels were only able to post a meager 10 points. They only had 301 total yards. The Bama defense held the Rebels' rushing attack to only 56 yards that day. So it's really crazy to think that Ole Miss was able to turn it on against LSU, and I think they are maybe from top to bottom a better team than Alabama. If you're asking me my opinion, I think LSU is a more loaded team than Alabama, but there's something to be said about coaching. Nick Saban is the GOAT, and he was able to turn it on against Ole Miss and got the victory against the Rebels a couple weeks ago when I thought Ole Miss was really trending upwards. I thought that they could beat Alabama. I thought they would be one of the better teams in the SEC West. With this win against LSU, they still are contention of doing that, being a top team. It's crazy, though, if you look specifically at this game against LSU, Ole Miss was penalized 11 times for 121 yards, which is crazy that they got penalized that many times for those many yards and were able to hold on to the victory against Ole Miss. Against LSU, rather. Ole Miss lives on to see another day. That was a crazy game in the SEC this past weekend, and a game that really had my attention. And again, a game that Ole Miss desperately needed to stay alive in the SEC West this season. If we take a look at another game out of the ACC this time, we had Duke versus Notre Dame. And a week after suffering a tough loss at home against Ohio State, Notre Dame bounces back with a 21-14 victory over Duke University. Irish running back Audric Estime carried his team on his back as the ball carrier had 18 touches for 81 total yards and 2 total touchdowns. So he had a great day, a big performance for Notre Dame to steal that close victory against Duke, 21-14. And Estime, if we look at what he's been able to do this season, he leads all FBS rushers with 672 total yards on the ground. So Estime is going to be a threat this season. He's going to be someone that Notre Dame is going to need to really rely on to keep their chances alive. Him and, of course, Sam Hartman at quarterback. They're a dynamic duo, certainly. The victory marked Notre Dame's 30th straight regular season win against ACC opponents. This upcoming week, Notre Dame has a Saturday night primetime matchup on ABC against 5-0 Louisville, which will certainly be no easy feat. So Notre Dame doesn't have an opportunity to really let the guard down. I think they're going to have to turn the gas up against Louisville. They've got a dynamic offense as well. So that's going to be a tough game this week out of the ACC. But for week 5 action, Notre Dame gets a great victory over Duke. This game had a lot of fanfare around it as College Game Day was on Duke's campus for the first time broadcasting their show. Comedian King John and Dr. Jong was there, and he gave his picks. I didn't watch the entire show, but I know people were upset on Twitter due to some antics from Pat McAfee. I think he was hungover or something. I think that's the gist of what I was getting online. Whether you love him or loathe him, Pat McAfee is certainly a strong personality. I think he appeals to a certain demographic, probably more consistent with Barstool Sports. Sadly, I think the whole production of College Game Day has morphed into something that I don't really truly vibe with anymore. I'm not saying that I don't like watching it or I don't actively like watch something else. I'm just saying maybe my tastes have evolved over time. This show really doesn't appeal to me as much as it used to as a kid. Game Day used to be appointment viewing for me as of a few years ago, but I just don't have like the time or the interest anymore for some of the shenanigans on that show. But I do think the segment with Lee Corso making his picks at the very end and wearing the headgear is still a lot of fun. I think that's something they do a really good job of. I think they do a perfect job of Lee Corso. I don't know if he writes his own stuff, his own material, but his segue into his final pick of the day is pretty funny. I love seeing Kirk Herbstreit dying of laughter right next to him. And it's a fun segment that they do. But overall, I don't have the time to watch the 3 or 4 hours of the show anymore. But I don't begrudge anybody that does. I guess I've just grown up as a college football viewer. But that's a show that really motivated me to do this podcast, motivated me to be a journalist. I really wanted to be on College Game Day as a young kid growing up in Chicagoland. And so it's just interesting that it doesn't really have the same effect on me anymore. I don't know if it has the same pull if we're looking, more broadly across the country, if it's still a show that everybody, wants to watch. But it's cool that they were at Duke for the first time ever. I'm just saying, I don't know if it really appeals to me the same way it did. But I digress. Notre Dame had a good victory over Duke in the ACC. That was a big game. And then the last game that I'll talk about here briefly in the SEC, we had Kentucky versus Florida. Kentucky got the impressive 33-14 victory over the Florida Gators on the legs of its running back Ray Davis, who is a former Temple and Vanderbilt transfer. Davis rushed for a career-high 280 yards and scored 4 total touchdowns in the game. It's really good to see the former Temple transfer having success in the SEC. I thought it was crazy when he left Temple in the beginning of the season a few years ago when we had Rod Carey there. You knew something wasn't right when Ray Davis left. I think after like the 4th game or maybe the 3rd game, he was a starting running back and he left that program. You knew something wasn't right at Temple, and boy, were we right about that in the end. But it's good to see him having success in the SEC. Davis is making a case as the best running back in the SEC. He's currently the 4th leading rusher in the conference, and he leads the entire SEC with 7 total touchdowns from scrimmage. For the Wildcats to stay relevant, they will need to capitalize on Devin Leary's arm and Ray Davis's dual threat ability of receiving and rushing. Kentucky is definitely a dark horse team out of the SEC East this season behind Georgia. And what do you know? Georgia and Kentucky meet this weekend in a big-time matchup. So it'll have big-time implications on the SEC East standings. Georgia's number 1. Kentucky is number 2 right now. Or they might be tied for first, actually, because they don't have any losses. But they are up there 1 and 2. And it's a big-time game out of the SEC East. If Kentucky is able to pull off the upset, that would be outstanding. Georgia kind of slipped a little bit this past weekend in their game. I'm not saying Georgia is unbeatable. If Kentucky plays a great game, they're rolling in all phases of the game, they may be able to pull up the upset. So we'll have to see what this weekend brings, but that's a big-time matchup for Week 6 action. So there we have it. Those were the top games out of Week 5. After this break, we'll get into my top 5 locks for Week 6 action. Don't go anywhere. The Cherry Pickin' Podcast will be right back.
Are you a tackle football fan? Kick off your day with an episode of Colts Corner. A group of passionate Colts fans discuss the latest news around Indianapolis Colts football. You don't want to miss us. Follow us on Facebook, Colts Corner 1, and on Twitter at Colts_Corner 1 and all major podcast platforms.
That includes Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify.
Basketball is back. And with that comes joy, tension, heartbreak, buzzer beaters, and elation. It's time to be courtside for every one of those moments, no matter where your team is playing. Short Courts specializes in making replica and custom basketball courts for your home, office, sports cave to decorate your walls with all those memories. If you have a picture, we can recreate it. Featured in the 2021 UniWatch Holiday Gift Guide, short courts are made using real wood. We frame and give them an epoxy finish to protect the new centerpiece of your memorabilia collection. With previous customers including Northern Kentucky University, Southern Utah University, 199 Apparel, the Perimeter Podcast with Adam Morrison, and many more celebrating the careers and retirements of their coaches, it's time you visit shortcourts.com for more info and a gallery of our work, or you can send us an email, info@shortcourts.com. Be sure to find us on social media, just search for Short Courts. It's time to bring the home court home.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Now we'll dive right into my top 5 locks for Week 6 action within the Power 5 conferences. We'll begin in the ACC, and in the Atlantic Coast Conference, I'm taking Florida State over Virginia Tech. It's a shame to see how the Virginia Tech program has disintegrated before our eyes. This program used to be dominant, but now the Hokies program is a shell of its former self, which is so sad to see. Florida State is coming off a bye week and will be rested and ready to go against Virginia Tech. I think the Seminoles offense has a big day against Virginia Tech. The Noles are scoring the 10th most points in FBS at 43.2 points per game. I think Florida State wins big, so I'm taking the Seminoles over the Hokies in the ACC. In the Big Ten, this may be a shock to many people, but I'm taking Nebraska over Illinois. The last time the Cornhuskers won against Illinois was back in 2019 on the road in Champaign. I think head coach Matt Rule and his Nebraska bunch gets its first victory in the Big Ten this weekend against Illinois for this season. The Illini weren't playing efficient ball against Purdue this last weekend en route to getting smoked 44-19 to the Boilermakers. Illinois only converted 2 of 13 on third down. Illinois also committed 9 penalties for 83 yards, which is never good. They're playing undisciplined ball. This would be a good win for Illinois if they can get it, but I feel like the pieces aren't all coming together this season for the Illini, and they're ripe for an upset against Nebraska this weekend, so I'm taking the Cornhuskers over the Illini in the Big Ten. In the Big 12, I'm taking Texas over Oklahoma. This is the 118th meeting of the Red River Showdown, which I need to get out to at some point in my life here soon. Oklahoma has won 16 of the last 24 matchups, but the Sooners got blown out. They got their doors blown off by the Longhorns last season during head coach Brent Venables' first season at the helm. It wasn't pretty. The Sooners were blanked 49-0. Now, I don't think this year will be as bad, but I am expecting a lot of high-powered offense from both of these teams. It should be a fun, high-scoring affair, but I'm leaning towards Texas winning this matchup this year in both of these teams' final season in the Big 12. So Texas over Oklahoma. In the Pac-12, I'm taking Colorado over Arizona State. Colorado will get a nice victory over Arizona State this weekend. It'll be a good bounce-back victory after these last 2 weeks. I will say, though, the Buffs got humbled by Oregon 2 weeks ago, but last weekend against USC, they hung in there when things looked bleak. The Trojans were up 34-7 in the second quarter before quarterback Shedeur Sanders and his Buffs came back to make it a ball game. The game ended 48-41, and I know the Sanders don't believe in any sort of moral victories, but that's pretty encouraging to know that Colorado was able to hang in there against USC. I wonder how the game would have been if Travis Hunter was in the game. We know he's a dual threat ability on offense and defense, which is insane these days. Colorado still has a tough schedule remaining, but I think a 7-win season is possible. Now, my question goes out to Colorado, Buffalo fans, folks associated with that program. The question is, if if Colorado doesn't make a bowl game, is this season considered a failure? Granted, I know Colorado went 1-11 last year, but I'm just asking the question. If you're a Colorado Buffaloes fan, are you disappointed if you don't at least make a bowl game this season with all the hype surrounding this team? And I'm not asking that question as a hater. I'm just genuinely asking from the bottom of my heart. If Colorado doesn't make a bowl game this season, are you disappointed? It was a great start to the season. Those first 3 victories, especially the first game against TCU, was amazing. It was so exciting. All the stars and celebrities support this program. They support Deion Sanders and his mission. I think it's a good thing for college football. And I think he's got some good kids on that team. Travis Hunter, if you saw, I think last weekend I saw a clip of him with a Colorado State player that had that dirty hit on him, or that questionable hit. They came together. They were talking. They were laughing together. Like, that's a good young man. That's a good program that Deion Sanders is running there. It makes me happy to see. I'm just wondering, at the end of the day, if Colorado doesn't make a bowl game, are you upset with that? I think they are on their way to making a bowl game. There's some winnable games, certainly. They may even get an upset victory over a team, especially when they get Travis Hunter back. I think they would have had a really, really good shot of maybe doing something against USC if he was in the game. Oregon looked like total domination from the Ducks, so I'm not even sure if they would have had a chance. And honestly, Colorado had been running so high for so long, for 3 weeks. You knew there was going to be a letdown at some point. It came against Oregon, but Deion Sanders said after that game, this is the lowest that you're going to see us. We will never be like this again. So I believe him, and I think Colorado makes a bowl game, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are. Tweet me or X me online. In the SEC, I'm taking LSU over Missouri. LSU is coming off an extremely tough loss to Ole Miss, and Missouri is rolling at 5-0. It's a great start for the Missouri Tigers. My sister went there, so that's great for that program, MIZ. But I don't believe they have truly been tested this season. I don't even think this game will be close, if I'm being honest. LSU's offense has been explosive this season, and if last week's 55-49 loss is any indication of that, LSU can score points, and they can score points in a hurry. I think LSU will score points at will in this game against Missouri, and I think they're going to make Mizzou's defenders work on Saturday. I'm taking LSU big over Missouri. So those are my top 5 locks for Week 5 action. Let me run those down for you one more time. In the ACC, FSU over Virginia. In the Big 10, Nebraska over Illinois. In the Big 12, Texas over Oklahoma. In the Pac-12, Colorado over Arizona State. And in the SEC, I'm taking LSU over Missouri. So there we have it, my friends. I want to get into some big games for Week 6 action real quick before we go and wrap this show up with a nice, pretty little bow. In the SEC, we've got Alabama versus Texas A&M. Texas A&M clipped Alabama a few seasons ago. That was a big-time victory for Jimbo Fisher. Those guys seem so similar to me, so I'm sorry that I mixed their names up. But it was a big-time victory for Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M. It's a big-time matchup this weekend against these two teams. These teams are currently undefeated in the conference, and they sit atop the Big Ten West standings. The winner of this game doesn't have any easier road the rest of the way in the SEC West, but they'll be sitting pretty at 3-0 in the conference ahead of the other teams. They'll control their own destiny. So it's a good thing if they can get to 3-0. The work is not done because the SEC West is really competitive this season. It's really tough, but it's a good head start for whoever wins this game. So Alabama versus Texas A&M will be a big-time game this weekend. I'll be watching that one for sure. And then out of the Big Ten, who would have thought I'd be talking about Maryland versus Ohio State as a big-time game out of the Big Ten this weekend? Maryland is 5-0 for the first time since 2001, which is crazy. That's when I entered high school, back in 2001. I'm a grown man now. I'm 37. And Maryland is rolling. They had an impressive beatdown of Indiana last weekend. They have a tough task of traveling up to Columbus to face Ohio State, who's coming off of a bye week from their thrilling victory against Notre Dame back on September 23rd, which is a day after my birthday, and which is my dad's birthday on the 23rd. A little behind-the-scenes background on CherryPickin and his family. Ohio State and Maryland have played 8 times, and the Buckeyes have won all of those contests. I think I'm more interested to see if Maryland can hang with Ohio State offensively. The Terps have a lot of firepower. They're capable of putting up points. And so I think it could be a close game. I'm not picking a team at this point, but that's going to be a very interesting game. And I'm sure Ohio State is favored to win, but I'd be curious to see if Maryland can play a full game and, who knows, make it close. That would be really impressive. Well, there we have it, my friends. That was my Week 6 podcast. I hope it gets you ready for all the action this weekend. Thank you for downloading this show. I appreciate you being a supporter, follower of CherryPickin. I really do appreciate it. I'm excited for a good week, but I'm really looking forward to college football this upcoming weekend for Week 6 action. Hope you guys have a good seat on the couch. Hope you guys have fun, and I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I can't wait to talk to you soon. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. Have a blessed week. Peace. That's when I entered high school back in 2001. I'm a grown man now. I'm 37. Thank you again for tuning into my CherryPickin podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to subscribe to my show and drop me a rating on Apple Podcasts. All of my digital content can be found at the website CherryPickinsports.com. And if you are looking to interact with me via social media, my Twitter handle is @Cherry_Pickin. That's PICKIN. On my Twitter, you'll also find a link to my blog where I post my weekly college football predictions and analysis. I can also be reached via email at cherrypickinsports@gmail.com. Please feel free to reach out to me regarding what you like about this podcast or about what content you'd like to hear more of on future episodes. I sincerely thank you for your support, and I can't wait to talk to you again soon. Take care.